the biggest emphasis to support the war effort in 1917, 1918 in Missouri came by way of supporting the effort to reduce food consumption and to increase food production. And in fact, the leader of that effort was a guy named Frederick Mumford. There's a building within 100 yards of here named for him. He was the Dean of Agriculture. And he led the effort, and there emerged this incredible effort, really statewide, to increase consumption of agricultural products, especially beef and pork. Wheat was important on the one hand, so increasing production. On the other hand, trying to decrease consumption. We had, for example, what were called wheatless Mondays and wheatless Wednesdays. There was the encouragement to eat bread that was made of a combination of wheat and other products, so to save on wheat. And it became patriotic, and that was a big push. Mumford led first the Council for Defense and then the food production effort. And the effort was to persuade Missourians that the most patriotic thing they could do was to grow a garden. The governor's wife, Mrs. Gardner, started gardening on the governor's mansion lawn and pledged that she would raise all the food that the family needed so that they wouldn't have to buy anything. The Missouri State Penitentiary started sending prisoners out into some acreage across the river in the Missouri River bottom. I think maybe something close to 900 acres, where they began to try to raise their own food. School kids were encouraged to, to consume less, to eat less. Missourians were actually they were persuaded that it was for the good of the country to eat less, and to eat less of certain products, and to substitute meat for, or substitute other things for meat, for example. There were all sorts of clubs organized. There were women's groups that went out to try to teach people how to cook more efficiently. I think there's an estimate today. We think of, we don't eat at home much. We eat out, fast food restaurants and so forth. But I remember seeing a statistic that about 80% of meals were eaten at home in this period. And so that identified women as, because they were, for the most part, the people who produced the food, they were the people who were in the vanguard of this effort to try to reduce consumption and to stretch meals by adding all sorts of other products to meat products and to cereals and so forth.
So what effect did this have on the war effort itself?
Well, it dramatically increased the production of food, which meant that Europe was starving. There was a serious shortage of food, and much of the food being produced here was being sent to Europe to help sustain the soldiers there. I think for me, one of the interesting things, it would be interesting today to see how Missourians would respond to the severe restrictions that were placed on them, the rationing, the government intrusion, we would call it today, of telling people how many ounces of beef they could have a week and how much milk they could consume and so forth. People tended to accept this in stride, and again, to take it as their patriotic duty to consume less. And by consuming less, they were sending this food to Europe. This is before large numbers of American soldiers were even in the European theater, because remember that though we declared war in April of 1917, it was quite some time before we actually got soldiers over to Europe in the war.
And during World War I, now was there any kind of enforced rationing then like we had in World War II?
Well, not in terms of the ration coupons and that sort of thing, but there was rationing. There were penalties, especially for merchants who sold more wheat than they were supposed to, more flour than they were supposed to, more sugar than they were supposed to. But I would argue that a lot of the pressure was public pressure, shaming, frankly, public shaming of people who violated the quotas of consumption and production that were established by the government. I mean, there was an effort to try to let everybody know through these a great number of volunteer groups, and that's something to keep in mind. I think the Council for Defense, I may have this number wrong, but I think I'm pretty close to it. I think in the entire existence of the Council of Defense, they only spent about $70,000. The bulk of what was done with volunteerism. I mean, just thousands and thousands of people, from again, women's groups to Red Cross groups, and again, it was all the power of persuasion. These women who were known as 4-minute women, who would go out and speak in 4-minute talks to groups of people, trying to tell them what their civic duty was in terms of consumption and production of food.
You were telling me a little bit before we started rolling that for the men it was considered, growing food was considered pretty much tantamount to picking up a weapon? Yeah,
in fact, there was a campaign by the Council of Defense arguing that that the two were equatable, that you could fight the enemy just as efficiently and effectively by producing agricultural products as you could by picking up a weapon and going off to fight. And in fact, if you look, this is evidenced in the draft quotas. You could avoid the draft if you were an agricultural producer. You could avoid the draft if you had dependents, either children, parents, or siblings, who you were the sole responsibility for. There was a great emphasis placed on the need for agricultural production or the production of goods that were seen to be essential to the war effort.